Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can see.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So yes, thank you, Olivier. I'm Claire Stout. I'm a professional services cybersecurity engineer. I'm in the pre-sales team, and I will show you in a high level EGRE's approach in cyber risk management. So first of all, EGRE is a collaborative platform. It means that it can be used and useful to every actors that are involved in your risk analysis, such as cyber experts that we call risk analysis risk manager, who is the one who will build the risk analysis. It can be used by project managers who has the ground information on your system, on the system that is being analyzed. It can be used by the CISO, who will need to have a global view of all of the risks among all of the systems. And it also can be used by managers and top managers with our strategic vision of your risk analysis. So the main purpose of EGRE is to obtain a risk mapping throughout all of the system. So why obtain a risk mapping? For you to prioritize the risks that you want to reduce amongst all of the systems, and for you to put in place the most efficient treatment plan in order to reduce those risks. So how to obtain the risk mapping? EGRE can be used for different use cases that I will show you. I will show you the main one. The first one is to conduct a cyber risk analysis. Our system is a multi-methodology platform which will guide you in modelizing your system and performing your risk analysis according to your standard. Integrate cybersecurity into project by assessing the cyber criticality of a project in order to adapt the controls in your risk analysis and monitor the implementation over time. Measure the cybersecurity level of your IT/IoT system by measuring the cybersecurity deployment of your cybersecurity strategy, ensure compliance, and ultimately reach global risk governance. And the last one is measure the cybersecurity level of your subcontractors and suppliers by assessing and evaluating the cybersecurity posture of your subcontractors and ensure your safety. So whatever the use case you choose to do in our platform, you will have for each of them a list of risks, of controls, and of treatment plans in your system, for your system. What we add in EGRE platform is a global and transversal mapping of your risks, the controls, and the treatment plans. For each of your system, you have conducted a risk analysis, but you may need to have a global view of all of the risk, the controls, and the treatment plans amongst all of your system. And for that, we have interfaces for the risks. So here you have all of the risks with their values. So the initial values, the residual values, and all of the risk amongst all of your systems. Here you have an interface with all of the controls that are linked to your risks with their status of implementation. So if the control is applied today or if it's planned to be applied in the future. And here an interface with all of the treatment plans. So these three interfaces are all the information you need, the CISO needs, in order to make the right decision in the controls that are needed to be put in place. So for example, with the first interface, you may choose to prioritize the controls that are reducing the most critical risks. And with the control interface and the treatment plan interface, you have information in your controls with, for example, the cost of the controls or the number of requirements this control will meet. And so you can prioritize your treatment plan and your controls according to the cost of the controls or for a compliance issue. So these are the three interfaces that we call the 360-degree vision. But as you can understand, in the first interface, you have an enormous list of operational risks, of technical risks. That's why we have created the strategic vision. In the strategic vision, you will be able to categorize all of those technical risks under what we call macro risk, strategic risks. And for this macro risk, you will be able to define an objective to reach and to decrease the cost of those macro risks. Because for each of these macro risks, using the FAIR method, you will be able to estimate an annual loss, a cost, and you will be able to financially quantify every macro risk. And so with this macro risk, you can then set up an objective to reach to decrease this loss for each macro risk. So this is EGRE's approach. It's a bottom-up approach. Now let's take an example to show you how the automatic risk reduction works in EGRE and with a top-down approach. So if we start from the strategic vision, so here you have a list of macro risks. So for example, external fraud, internal fraud, data leak. For each of these macro risks, you have financially quantify an annual loss. And as you have understood, each macro risk is in fact a collection of operational risks that we can find in the 360-degree vision. And each of these operational risks comes from a risk analysis. So here, for example, I take web application risk analysis that you have conducted in EGRE. And for example, there is one operational risk: an attack from the corporate network leads to an intrusion into the SE and have access to banking information. These operational risks, technical risks, in your risk analysis is linked to several controls. So here, for example, it is linked to 3 controls: continuous monitoring systems, application updates and security patches on server, or internal and external intrusion test by an external service provider. In the risk analysis, the risk manager will be able to define a reduction percentage for this control on this particular risk. So this risk reduction is a controlled reduction. It is done by the risk manager in the system that is being analyzed. If you do that, if you do this controlled reduction in every risk of your macro risk, you will end up with an average reduction for that macro risk. And so you will be able to precisely define a reduction percentage for the risk and globally for the collection of risk in your macro risk. So if we go back to the example of the external fraud, and you have estimated an annual cost of 8 million, for example. So as you can see, and as we know it, this is an estimated annual cost, annual loss. But what is not estimated is the reduction that comes from every risk analysis at a low level, at the system level, that leads this annual loss of 8 million to a 6.4 actual loss and to a 4 million loss, planned loss. And more globally, this reduction, the 34% reduction amongst all of the macro risk, is a mastered reduction. So this is the example for the top-down automatic risk reduction that you can perform in our EGRE Risk Manager platform. Olivier, I don't know if you want to conclude.
No, the conclusion is, thanks, Claire. The conclusion is all this mapping and process is automated, and and also it's an automated and constant process. That's why you can update, and it's a long iteration. That's why you can see and control this kind of control reduction cost and on the stress. And of course, we can invite you to test the solution. And if you want to test it, we can send you the license to be able to test it on your own infrastructure and in your own context. We are on time. That's why I'll let you the stage. And of course, I will be more than happy to answer to all your questions later.